It was just a Halloween night. Like any other. Costumes, candy, laughing kids. Until it wasn't. Until the mask stopped being part of the fun and started hiding something real. This is not a ghost story. This is about what happens when the scare is genuine, when the threat isn't make-believe, and when the only thing standing between a normal night and an unthinkable one is a split-second decision, and the courage to trust your gut when every single thing feels wrong. What I'm about to tell you changed how I see the world. It made me question chance, and safety, and the simple act of walking down a dark street. Listen closely. Because this could happen to anyone. It happened to me. This happened 2 years ago, on Halloween night, 2023. I'm 25 now, but back then, I was 22. I'd had a long, draining day at work because of a festival we'd thrown, a whole event where parents brought their kids to the community center for games, costume contests, trivia, and a chaotic kids versus parents dodgeball match. It was fun, truly, but it emptied me out. That's the thing about my job as a community worker, these events are the point, and I love them, but by the end, you're running on fumes. Anyway, I finally got home, collapsed onto my couch, and was fully ready to just shut down for the night. This was maybe an hour after I got in, around 6 o'clock. Then my phone rang. It was my little sister. I'll call her Savannah. She was 15. She was calling because she and my nephew, Jackson, he was 11, needed someone to take them trick-or-treating. Our parents weren't up for it, and Jackson's parents had, yet again, flaked. And like it always seems to go, it fell to me, the cool big brother, to step in and make the magic happen. I was exhausted. I didn't want to move. But I heard the need in her voice, and I pictured Jackson's disappointed face. So I got up. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my things, and drove over to my parents' house to pick them up. When I got there, I asked if they were ready to roll. Savannah was still putting the final touches on her costume. She'd gone all out as Raven from Teen Titans. She had the full leotard and cloak, and she'd done this amazing white makeup that gave her a genuinely ghostly, otherworldly look. Jackson was bouncing off the walls, already in his full Sub-Zero getup from Mortal Kombat, practicing his freezing poses on the furniture. Once Savannah was satisfied, we piled into my car. I took them to a known hotspot, a busy, well-off neighborhood where the houses were close together and the candy was plentiful. The place was buzzing. As soon as we hit the sidewalk, we were swept into the current. House after house, all decorated, all friendly. There was one older guy who stood out. He had a little grill going on his driveway. Instead of candy, he was handing out hot dogs and cans of soda. He told every kid that sugar was fine, but they needed some protein, too. Said he did it every year. Honestly, we need more people like him. The atmosphere was perfect. Everyone was in a good mood. We saw amazing costumes. People complimented Savannah and Jackson. For a good, long while, it was just a perfect Halloween. We finally called it quits when Jackson's bag was so heavy he could barely lift it. The last house was at the far end of the neighborhood, which meant about a 10-minute walk back to where I'd parked the car. As we walked, the night changed. The crowds thinned. Porch lights started winking off. The cheerful noise faded into a quiet, almost intimate, suburban stillness. That's why I noticed it. My eyes are always scanning, a habit I can't turn off. And across the street, in the front yard of a completely dark house, no lights, no decorations, I saw a figure. Just standing there. Motionless. They were dressed in all black, a long, hooded cloak that fell to their calves, with dark clothes underneath. The hood was deep, and in the shadows, I couldn't see a face at all. Couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. But I had this crawling, instinctive certainty, they were watching us. I moved a little closer to Savannah and Jackson, my voice dropping to a low murmur. "Stay close to me," I said. "Don't stare, but look across the street, at that dark house by the big tree. See that person?" Jackson squinted and chuckled. "Oh, yeah. Cool cloak. Probably waiting to jump out and scare someone." But Savannah, she looked. And she saw what I saw. The absolute, predatory stillness of it. Her hand tightened on my sleeve. She knew. She knew about the Glock I carried in my backpack. My warning told her this wasn't a game. Jackson was still blissfully clueless, too young for me to explain the real weight I was carrying. We kept walking, a little faster now. And that's when I heard the footsteps behind us. Heavy. Deliberate. The crunch of thick boots on concrete, keeping pace. I turned my head, just enough. It was the same figure. But the cloak was gone now. In the dim light from a distant street lamp, I could see the outfit clearly. Black tactical pants, tucked into rugged combat boots. A modular tactical vest over a dark shirt. And the face was now covered by a tight, full-face spandex mask. It was seamless, anonymous, with holes for eyes and mouth that looked like black voids. The casual weirdness of a minute ago was gone. This was something else entirely. Tactical gear means preparation. Preparation means intent. My blood went cold. He's following us, I thought. I bent my head between the kids, my voice an urgent, razor-sharp whisper. Listen very carefully. Do not stop walking. Do not look back. The person I mentioned is behind us right now. We are not going to run. We are going to walk calmly and quickly to the car. Do you understand? I looked right at Jackson as I said it. He just nodded, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by a confused fear. Savannah gave a sharp, terrified nod. She understood completely. The walk to the car was the longest 2 minutes of my life. The sound of those boots was a constant, terrifying metronome behind us. Every cell in my body was screaming. My hand was on the zipper of my backpack, feeling the shape of the gun inside. The car was under a street lamp, 10 yards away, 5. We reached it. I hit the fob, the locks clunked open. Get in. Now. Lock the doors, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I didn't wait to see them obey. I turned, shrugging the backpack off my shoulder, and pulled the Glock free. I raised it, adopting a low-ready stance, the muzzle aimed at the ground just in front of the approaching figure. They were about 20 feet away and still coming. Stop right there. My voice cut through the silent street like a gunshot. Do not come any closer. Why are you following us? The figure froze. For a second, there was nothing. Then, slowly, the hands came up in a gesture of surrender. One hand moved to the head, fingers hooking under the edge of that spandex mask. It peeled back, revealing a woman. She looked to be in her 30s, with sharp features and pale skin. Her expression was cold, assessing. She looked at me, then at the gun in my hands, her eyes utterly flat. I said, "Why are you following us?" I repeated, my finger resting alongside the trigger guard. Her voice, when it came, was robotic. Devoid of any real emotion. I'm an undercover officer. We received a report of a break-in at that residence. I was conducting surveillance. When you exhibited hostile observation of my position, I identified you as a potential suspect. Lower your weapon immediately, or I will have you arrested for threatening a law enforcement officer. The words hit me, but they didn't fit. My mind was racing, tearing her story apart even as a part of me recoiled at the idea of pointing a gun at a cop. Why stand in the front yard, facing away from the house? Why the cloak over tactical gear? How is that undercover? Why would a burglar be casually walking with 2 kids trick-or-treating? Why follow us for blocks instead of just identifying yourself? The story was a house of cards. But the threat of arrest, of a felony, of traumatizing the kids, it was a powerful deterrent. With a gut-wrenching reluctance, I lowered the muzzle, pointing it at the ground but keeping the gun in my hands. I didn't holster it. If you're undercover, I said, my voice tight with strain, why the tactical vest? And the mask? And the cloak? That doesn't make any sense. Her blank expression finally shifted. A flash of pure irritation, then something darker, something malicious and contemptuous. She didn't answer my questions. She just stared, as if recalculating her entire approach. Then, her lips curled into the most unsettling smile I have ever seen. It was a dead, mirthless thing that never reached her cold eyes. If you didn't have that gun, she said, her voice now dripping with a venomous chill, this night would have ended a hell of a lot different for you. As the last word hung in the air, movement flickered in the corners of my vision. From the gaps between the houses to our left and right, 4 more figures emerged. Silently. They moved with a coordinated purpose, fanning out behind her. They wore identical tactical gear, same masks. 2 men, 2 women. They didn't speak. They didn't advance. They just stood there, forming a loose semicircle behind their leader. Their posture was unnervingly neutral, their masked faces completely void of any readable emotion. They were just waiting. Watching with a soulless, patient stillness that was worse than any shout or threat. "Get in the car now," I barked, backpedaling toward my door, my gun sweeping across the group of 5. I heard the frantic sound of the door locks clicking open behind me. I yanked the driver's door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut, my finger jamming the lock button. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the key. The engine roared to life. I threw it into reverse, then drive, and punched the gas. In the last second as I pulled away, my eyes locked on the scene in the rearview mirror. The woman was still standing in the exact same spot, that horrible, frozen smile still on her face, her eyes tracking my car. The 4 others simply turned their heads, those blank masks following my retreat. They made no move to chase, to write down my plate, to yell. They just watched. That image is burned into my mind forever. A silent, anonymous tactical unit, standing under a street lamp on a quiet suburban street, on Halloween night. The whole car ride back was swallowed by a thick, trembling silence. Jackson was curled into a ball in the back. Savannah was staring straight ahead, silent tears cutting through her white raven makeup. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my arms ached. I dropped them off at my parents', walking them to the door, my eyes never stopping their scan of the dark street. "Tell Mom and Dad everything," I whispered. "Lock everything. Don't open the door for anyone." My mom saw our faces and pulled them inside without a word. Back in my own apartment, the adrenaline crash left me hollow and shaking. I replayed it all. The lie was so obvious. But who were they? What did they want? Why us? The neighborhood was full of people. Why target a guy with 2 kids? Sleep was impossible. I filed a police report the next morning, carefully editing my story, saying we'd been followed and intimidated by a group in gear claiming to be cops. The officer was polite but dismissive. "Halloween prank," he said, writing it down. "Probably some airsoft group taking things too far. No direct threat made. We'll make a note of it." And that was that. For a few days, I lived in a state of raw nerve endings. Jumping at shadows. Checking every reflection. And then, on the 4th day, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No words. Just a picture. A high-resolution photo of my car. Taken at night. It was parked in my assigned spot in my apartment complex lot. The angle was from the tree line at the back of the property, a place you shouldn't be able to get to. The timestamp on the file said it was taken at 2:13 in the morning. 2 nights after Halloween. That was the message. Crystal clear. We know where you live. We were here, in the dark, watching your home. The last shred of hope that it was some random, bizarre encounter evaporated. This was deliberate. I was being told I was seen. I went back to the police with the photo. They were more concerned but said the same thing. Harassment, maybe. But with no explicit threat, there's little we can do. It's a burn phone. Get some cameras. Be aware. I was already aware. That was the whole problem. I had to know. I went back to that neighborhood, to that dark house, on a sunny afternoon. A man in his 40s answered. I asked if he'd had a break-in on Halloween. He looked completely confused. No, he said. I was in bed early. Work the next day. Didn't hear a thing. Cops? No one called any cops. So that was it. The final proof her story was a complete, spontaneous fabrication. A lie told to explain the unexplainable. The aftermath, it changed me. I got a security system. Cameras at every angle. Motion lights. I started therapy for the paranoia, the insomnia, the hypervigilance that was exhausting me. The gun, my tool of last resort, now felt like a permanent, necessary part of my existence. 2 years have passed. No more texts. No more sightings. But the questions haven't left. Why us? Was it random? Were they hunting that night? Or was there something about me, something I'll never know, that made me a target? I'll never have those answers. All I have is the certainty of that moment, the chill of that smile, the void behind those masks. And one hard lesson, learned in the worst way possible: the world is not inherently safe. Safety is something we build, through awareness, through precaution, and sometimes, through the means to defend it. My weapon that night didn't start a conflict. It ended one before it could truly begin. I will never know what their different ending was. But my imagination has provided me with plenty of nightmares, and they are more than enough. So, always, always watch your surroundings. You're not being paranoid. You're choosing to stay alive. The silence in the car was a living thing, thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the engine and the too loud sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. In the rearview mirror, I could see Jackson, his Sub-Zero mask pushed up on his forehead, his face pale and drawn as he stared blankly at the glowing, discarded candy in his lap. The warrior costume now looked like what it was: plastic and fabric, a child's armor that offered no protection against the real world. Savannah hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, her raven persona completely dissolved into the shell-shocked teenager beneath. The white makeup was smudged by her tears, creating a haunting, tragic mask of its own. I drove on autopilot, my eyes constantly flicking between the road ahead and the mirrors, expecting at any moment to see headlights closing in, or a dark vehicle sliding out of a side street. Every shadow between houses, every parked car with dark windows, felt like an ambush point. The cheerful Halloween decorations we passed now seemed grotesque and mocking. The grinning jack-o'-lanterns leered with new menace. The dangling skeletons seemed less like plastic and more like promises. Pulling up to my parents' house, I didn't park in the driveway. I stopped in the middle of the quiet street, leaving the engine running. "Go," I said, my voice rough. "Straight to the door. Don't look around. Just go." I got out with them, my back to the car, scanning the entire neighborhood block. I watched until the front door opened, spilling yellow light onto the porch, and my mother's silhouette appeared. She took one look at Savannah's face and pulled her inside. Jackson shuffled in after her, not even turning back to wave. The door closed. I heard the deadbolt slam home, a solid, definitive sound. Only then did I get back in the car and leave. Back in my apartment, the silence was worse. It was my silence, alone. The adrenaline that had been holding me up evaporated, and the shakes hit me in a violent, nauseating wave. I slumped against my front door, sliding down to the floor. I couldn't even make it to the couch. My mind was a scratched record, replaying the same 5 seconds on a loop, the woman's dead smile, the words, "a hell of a lot different," the silent emergence of the 4 figures from the shadows. I kept thinking about their hands. They hadn't gone for weapons. They hadn't assumed any kind of tactical stance. Their hands had just hung at their sides, relaxed. That was the most terrifying part. Their calm was absolute. They weren't agitated criminals, they were operators. And we had been their objective. I must have sat there for an hour before the cold from the floor seeped into my bones and forced me to move. I went through the motions of security, checking the locks on every window and door, twice, peering through blinds into the dark parking lot. I placed the Glock on the coffee table within arm's reach, something I had never done before. Sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the building's settling frame, every distant hum of a car engine, was the sound of a boot on gravel, the quiet turn of a doorknob. The next morning, under the harsh, rational light of day, the event felt both more real and more surreal. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but layered over with a desperate need for protocol, for official validation. I needed to tell someone in authority. I drove to the local precinct, my hands clammy on the wheel. Sitting in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting area, filling out the incident report form, I engaged in a brutal internal edit. I wrote, "While walking with my minor sister and nephew during trick-or-treating, we were followed for several blocks by an individual in tactical clothing. When confronted, the individual claimed to be an undercover police officer investigating a break-in. Shortly after, 4 similarly dressed individuals appeared. We felt threatened and retreated to our vehicle. The individual's story seemed inconsistent, and their demeanor was unsettling. I said nothing about drawing my firearm. That detail sat between me and the form, a silent third party. I knew mentioning it would immediately flip the script, making me the potential suspect, the aggrieved party morphing into the person under investigation for assault with a deadly weapon. The system I was appealing to for help could easily become the system that punished me for the very act that ensured our escape. The officer who took my statement, a weary-looking man with a salt and pepper mustache named Officer Daly, listened patiently. He typed notes into his computer. When I finished, he leaned back. "Oakwood Estates, you said? Nice area. Lots of kids out last night." He sighed, a sound of routine. "Look, I'm not dismissing your concern. It's weird. But on Halloween, you get all sorts. Airsoft groups, paintballers, those milsim LARPers, they sometimes take their games into public, which they shouldn't do. It's incredibly irresponsible. The undercover line is a common excuse when they get caught trying to scare people or are just hanging around where they shouldn't be. It's stupid, not necessarily criminal." "They weren't kids," I insisted, my voice tighter than I intended. "And they weren't playing. The way they moved, the way they just appeared. It was coordinated." He gave a nod that was meant to be placating. "I believe you that it was scary. I'll file this, and we'll have a patrol car do an extra loop through Oakwood for the next few nights. If there's no break-in report from that address, and I can check that, then it was almost certainly just some folks in poor taste causing a disturbance. If you get any more contact, or see them again, call us immediately." It was the bureaucratic version of a pat on the head. Asterisk there. Go home, asterisk. I left feeling more vulnerable than when I'd arrived. The official channel had labeled my trauma as a disturbance. The stone in my gut grew heavier. For the next 72 hours, I existed in a state of hypervigilance. I took different routes to work. I sat in my car in parking lots for minutes at a time, watching my surroundings before going inside. I found myself studying people's shoes, their posture, the way they held their hands. The world had become a set of potential threats to be assessed and catalogued. I called Savannah every night. She was quiet, having nightmares. Jackson, my parents reported, had become clingy and didn't want to sleep with the light off. The ripple effects of that single encounter were spreading, poisoning our sense of normalcy. Then, the text arrived. It was a Tuesday evening. I was trying to lose myself in a video game, a futile attempt at normalcy. The buzz of my phone on the table was like an electric shock. Unknown number. No area code. My throat went dry. I opened it. Just the picture. My car, in its spot. The angle was from the dense cluster of pines and rhododendrons that marked the back property line of my apartment complex, a small, untended wood that separated us from the back of a commercial strip. No sidewalk, no path. You'd have to wade through underbrush to get that shot. The timestamp, 2:13 a.m. 2 nights prior. This was not a prank. This was not LARPing. This was a deliberate, targeted act of surveillance. And it was a message, brilliantly crafted in its ambiguity. It said, "Your sanctuary is not secure. We have been here, in the dark, while you slept. We are not done, Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me, followed immediately by a surge of anger so potent it made my vision swim. They were toying with me. I saved the image, then immediately called the police again, demanding to speak to Officer Daly. When I got him on the phone and described the text, his tone shifted from weary to alert, but it was a frustrated alert. "Okay, that changes things. That's deliberate harassment, possibly intimidation. But the problem remains, Mr. Monroe. We can subpoena phone records for that number, but if it's a disposable burner, and it almost certainly is, it'll lead to a dead end. The photo itself isn't an explicit threat. No, we're going to hurt you, no demand. Legally, it's a very gray area. My strong advice is to invest in a good home security system with cameras. Document everything. If they escalate, if they show up at your home or place of work, then we have more to go on. So I just wait for them to escalate?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "You take prudent steps to protect yourself and your family," he said, his voice firm. "And you let us know the moment anything else happens. I'll flag this in the system." It was the best I would get. After hanging up, I felt a terrifying powerlessness. The law moved slowly, required concrete threats. These people operated in the shadows, in the spaces the law couldn't touch. I couldn't wait for them to make a move I couldn't walk away from. That weekend, I went back to Oakwood Estates. I needed to see the stage where it all happened in the daylight, to reclaim some sense of agency. The house looked utterly ordinary. A two-story colonial with beige siding, a well-kept lawn, a couple of bikes lying in the driveway. Normalcy itself. Knocking on the door felt like stepping back into a play, but one where only I remembered the lines. The man who answered, clutching a mug of coffee, was the picture of confused suburbia. His denial was genuine. No break-in. No police call. He'd heard nothing. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and mild concern, the way you look at someone who might be having a nervous breakdown. "Maybe you should talk to someone, buddy," he'd said, gently, before closing the door. That interaction was the final nail. The woman's story was a complete fiction, spun on the spot. It meant everything she did and said afterwards was the truth of their intent. The following weeks were a blur of installation technicians and therapy sessions. I had a full suite of cameras installed, one covering the parking spot, one on the front door, one on the back patio, another with a wide view of the approach to my apartment. A monitored alarm system with sensors on every window and door. My therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Evans, helped me untangle the knot of fear, guilt, and hypervigilance. The guilt was surprising. I felt guilty for bringing the gun into a situation with kids, even though I was certain it was the reason we drove away. I felt guilty for not being able to protect Savannah and Jackson from the psychological fallout. I felt guilty for my own rage and fear. You experienced a profound violation of your perceived safety, Dr. Evans said during one session. Your brain is trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Who, why, what next? Without answers, it defaults to high alert, constantly scanning for the missing threat. The security system is a good external tool. We need to build your internal ones, too. To acknowledge the fear without letting it dictate your life. It was slow, hard work. I started sleeping in stretches longer than 2 hours. I stopped jumping at every notification on my phone. The acute paranoia receded into a chronic, low-grade awareness. I never stopped carrying my firearm, but the act became routine again, not a constant, trembling obsession. Months passed. Then a year. No more texts. No sightings. The cameras captured nothing but raccoons and delivery drivers. The police never called with updates because there were none. The incident slowly receded from a present terror to a past trauma, a scar. But scars have memory. 2 years later, on the eve of another Halloween, the old dread coils in my stomach. I don't take anyone trick-or-treating anymore. I hand out candy at my own heavily lit, camera-covered doorstep, and I find myself studying not the costumes of the children, but the postures of the parents waiting on the sidewalk, the shadows in the cars idling at the curb. The question why us has never been answered. Sometimes I think it was pure, terrible randomness. We were the targets that presented themselves at the wrong moment. Other times, in my darker hours, I wonder if they sensed something, if my own constant, subconscious vigilance marked me as a particular kind of challenge, a prize for their twisted game. The woman's words are etched into me, asterisk, this night would have ended a hell of a lot different for you. Asterisk, I have spent 2 years imagining those different endings. In some, we are robbed. In others, assaulted. In the worst ones, the ones that wake me in a cold sweat, we are taken, silently and efficiently, into those shadows between the houses, leaving behind only a spilled bag of candy on the empty sidewalk. My firearm prevented an ending. It did not provide the ending. The story has no closure, only a permanent, uneasy pause. So I move forward, carrying the weight of that night. I am more cautious, more prepared, and more painfully aware that the world contains pockets of inexplicable, organized malice that hide in plain sight, sometimes behind a smile on a perfectly ordinary street. The lesson was brutal, but it is mine. Awareness is not paranoia. It is the price of existing in a world where not all monsters wear masks for fun. Sometimes, the mask is the monster. And the only thing that keeps the night from turning into one of those different endings is the will to see the threat, and the courage to meet its gaze before it's too late. The therapy sessions with Dr. Evans became a weekly ritual, an anchor in the turbulent sea of my own mind. We would sit in her quiet, book-lined office, and I would dissect the Halloween night piece by piece, not as a story of survival, but as a psychological crime scene. "Let's talk about the guilt," she said one afternoon, sunlight streaming across a Persian rug. "You've mentioned it before. The feeling that you brought a weapon into a child's space." "It wasn't just bringing it," I said, my eyes fixed on the weave of the rug. "It was using it. I escalated the situation. I pointed a gun at another human being in front of my sister and nephew." "What does that teach them?" "That the world is so dangerous you have to meet it with lethal force? Jackson, he hasn't been the same. He used to be this fearless kid. Now he asks my dad to check the closet before he goes to sleep." Dr. Evans leaned forward slightly. "Alex, you didn't escalate. You responded to an escalation. The escalation was a group of armed, masked adults stalking two children and their guardian through a dark neighborhood. Your action was a de-escalation. It created a boundary they chose not to cross. You showed Savannah and Jackson that when a line is crossed, there is a line that can be held. That is not a lesson in fear. It is a lesson in agency." Her reframing was a lifeline I clung to, but it didn't erase the images. In my dreams, the scenario would play out with subtle, horrifying variations. Sometimes the gun would jam. Sometimes I would be too slow, and the four figures would already be circling the car, their blank masks pressed against the glass as Savannah screamed. In the worst dream, I would lower the gun, believing the woman's story, and as I turned to usher the kids into the car, the world would dissolve into a silent, violent struggle I could never see, only feel, a pressure, a muffled cry, and then waking up gasping, my sheets tangled. I threw myself into physical security with the fervor of a convert. The Ring camera was just the start. I installed steel-reinforced door frames, shatter-resistant film on all the ground floor windows, and motion-activated floodlights that turned my small patio into a prison yard noon at the slightest disturbance. I bought a fireproof safe bolted to the floor of my closet, not just for the gun, but for the new items I acquired, a medical trauma kit, a handheld radio scanner, and a dedicated, encrypted phone for my immediate family. I was building a fortress, not just against a specific threat, but against the very feeling of vulnerability. My relationship with my family shifted into a new, somber key. Sundays at my parents' house were no longer just about football and pasta. They became informal security briefings. My father, a retired civil engineer, listened intently as I explained the principles of situational awareness, the importance of exit routes, of not letting someone get within reactionary gap. He started parking his car differently in lots, backing into spaces. My mother, forever the worrier, had her anxiety validated and then channeled. She became meticulous about locking doors and keeping the blinds closed at night. Savannah, now 17, was the most profoundly changed. The incident had catalyzed a leap into a grim maturity. She took a self-defense course. She was fiercely protective of Jackson, walking him to his friend's house down the street. Once, I found her quietly researching state laws on self-defense and concealed carry. When I asked her about it, she just looked at me, her eyes older than they should be. "I need to understand," she said. "I can't be that scared again, Alex. Not ever." The silence from the unknown number was, in its own way, a form of torture. Every day without contact felt like a day the other shoe was suspended, held by a thread I couldn't see. I developed rituals. Every morning, the first thing I did was check all the camera feeds, scrolling through the night's timeline, my heart in my throat until I confirmed nothing but swaying branches and the occasional cat. I would then check my phone's blocked messages folder, a digital ghost trap. The emptiness was both a relief and a provocation. I began, almost compulsively, to research. Not in a way I could explain to Dr. Evans or the police. It was a deep, late-night dive into the abyss of the internet, searching for any fragment that mirrored my experience. I combed through true crime forums, local news archives for my county and the three surrounding it, and obscure blogs dedicated to strange encounters. I was looking for keywords: tactical gear, Halloween, impersonating police, group stalking. Most of what I found was noise. Conspiracy theories, paranoid rants, unfounded rumors. But then, about 8 months after the incident, I found a post on a regional subreddit titled "Weird Run-In at Silver Lake Park, Last Fall." The poster described being on a late-night walk with their dog the previous October when they were approached by a man and a woman in dark, military-looking clothes. The pair asked odd, invasive questions about the poster's routine before claiming to be park rangers conducting a survey. When the poster asked for ID, they became silent and simply walked away into the woods. The location was 20 miles from Oakwood Estates. The date was a week after Halloween. My hands shook as I typed a private message, asking for more details, but the account had been deleted a year prior. The thread was a digital fossil, a single scale from a creature I couldn't see. Another fragment surfaced a few months later, buried in the comments section of a local news article about a proposed neighborhood watch. A user with a generic name commented, "A watch is good, but be careful of fakes." Last year some guys in tactical vests were cruising our neighborhood in an unmarked van, saying they were with community security. Cops said they had no idea who they were. The neighborhood mentioned was on the opposite side of the county. The van was a new detail. It introduced logistics, planning. This wasn't just a group walking around. They had transport. They had a radius. I printed out these snippets, these fragile echoes, and pinned them to a corkboard in my home office. My girlfriend, Leah, who had moved in with me a year after the incident, called it my conspiracy corner. She tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She lived with the fortified doors and the cameras, but to her, they were precautions against a generalized threat. To me, the corkboard was evidence of a specific, shadowy pattern. It was the shape of the ghost that haunted me. What if they were just scouting? I said to her one night, standing in front of the board. The park, the neighborhoods. What if Halloween was a field test? To see how people react? to identify those who fight back and those who freeze? Leah wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. Or what if they were just creeps, Alex? Different groups of creeps, doing creepy things in a county of 1 million people. The world is full of random, awful noise. I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted the comfort of randomness. But the coordination I witnessed wasn't random. The photo of my car wasn't random. It was a targeted, intelligent pressure applied to a specific point, my sense of safety. The silence that followed felt like the patience of a predator, not the forgetfulness of a prankster. The second Halloween after the incident was a quiet torment. I didn't hand out candy. Leah and I turned off all the lights, closed the blinds, and watched a movie with the volume just loud enough to drown out the doorbell. Every chime from a neighbor's house made me flinch. I spent the night monitoring the camera feeds on my tablet, a spectral overseer in my own home. I saw the gangs of kids, the parents sipping from travel mugs, the life of the holiday playing out in silent, pixelated vignettes on my screen. I felt utterly divorced from it, a ghost in the machine of my own security. It was during this period of watchful stagnation that a new, more subtle fear began to germinate, the fear of becoming like them. Not in action, but in essence. Was my constant vigilance, my fortified home, my research, just a mirror of their own paranoid, operational mindset? Had I allowed them to recruit me into a world of perpetual threat assessment, to live in the very shadow they cast? Dr. Evans warned me of this. The trauma can become your identity, she said. Your life can become a monument to the bad thing that happened, rather than a continuation of the person you were before it. Who was I before? A community worker. A builder of events, a facilitator of joy. Now, I was a sentry. I still did my job, I still planned festivals, but a part of me was always elsewhere, scanning the crowd not for happy faces, but for unusual loiterers, for bags left unattended, for the single person not caught up in the celebration. I had become an expert in the ecology of fear, and the expertise had cost me a piece of my soul. The breakthrough, if you could call it that, came not from my research, but from a forced reckoning with normalcy. Leah's best friend was getting married, a destination wedding at a rustic lodge upstate. It was a 3-hour drive, in a forested area with spotty cell service. The idea of being away from my fortress, my cameras, my known environment, triggered a near-panic attack. I invented excuses, work deadlines, a fake illness, but Leah saw through it. You can't live in that apartment forever, Alex, she said, her voice gentle but firm. They won. If you don't go, they win. They turned you into a prisoner in the life you built. Her words were a splash of cold water. She was right. The fortress had become the cage. With a feeling like stepping off a cliff, I agreed to go. The weekend was an exercise in controlled terror. I brought the encrypted phone, a small travel lock for the lodge room door, and my Glock, secured in a locked case in the trunk. I drank too much at the rehearsal dinner to quiet the buzzing in my nerves. But I went. I danced with Leah under string lights. I made small talk with strangers. And the world did not end. On the drive home, exhausted and hungover but strangely clear-headed, I had a realization. The threat might have been, probably still was, real. But my response to it was a choice. I could either let the mystery of them consume my present and future, or I could accept the mystery and build a life within its unresolved shadow. I took down the corkboard when we got home. I didn't throw it away, that felt like a denial of my own experience, but I filed the printouts in a drawer. I reprogrammed the motion lights to be a little less sensitive, so they didn't blaze on every time a possum waddled through. I started leaving the blinds open during the day. The work is ongoing. Some nights, I still wake up, heart pounding, and grab the tablet to scroll through the cameras. Some days, a car that idles too long on my street will send a jolt of cold dread through me. The "why us" may never be answered. The "who" may never be known. But I am learning to live with the question mark. I am learning that safety is not the absence of threat, but the presence of a life you are willing to defend, and then to live, fully, even in its fragile, uncertain light. The woman in the mask stole my peace for a long time. She doesn't get to steal my future, too. The gun was a tool that preserved a possibility. Now, every day I choose not to be defined by that night, I am using a different tool to build upon that possibility. The vigilance remains, but it is slowly being joined, stitch by careful stitch, by something that feels, tentatively, like trust. Not trust in the world's inherent goodness, but trust in my own capacity to meet whatever emerges from the shadows, and to choose, again and again, to step back into the light. The realization in the car wasn't a magic cure. It was a new set of blueprints for a life I was still learning to inhabit. Taking down the corkboard felt less like a victory and more like a tactical retreat, acknowledging that the battlefront had shifted from an external investigation to an internal occupation. The war, it seemed, was for the territory of my own mind. I started small. I told Dr. Evans about the wedding, about the corkboard coming down. She called it integrative work. Not forgetting, not dismissing the trauma, but weaving the threads of that night into the larger tapestry of who I was, rather than letting it be a gaping, dominant hole. The event becomes a chapter, she said, not the entire book. Leah noticed the shift. One Saturday morning, she suggested a farmer's market downtown, an open, crowded space that would have sent me into a spiral of exit strategizing a year before. I felt the old resistance rise, the clamor of people, the difficulty of tracking movements, the enclosed perimeter of the stalls. But beneath it was Leah's hopeful, careful gaze, and the memory of dancing under those string lights. Yeah, I said, the word tasting strange. Let's go. The market was a sensory bombardment. The smell of frying dough and ripe fruit, the cacophony of voices and live folk music. For the first 20 minutes, I was a raw nerve. My eyes wouldn't stop moving, categorizing, the man in the hoodie who stood too still by the apple cart, the group of teenagers shoving each other playfully a little too close to us. My hand kept drifting to the small of my back, where my gun would have been, but today, at Leah's gentle suggestion, it was locked in the safe at home. The absence of its weight was its own kind of vulnerability, a phantom limb of anxiety. Then Leah took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. "Try the peach sample," she said, pointing. It was a command to be present. I took the slice. The flavor was shocking in its sweetness, a pure, bright burst of summer. For a moment, the taste was all there was. When I looked up, the man by the apple cart was buying a bag of fruit, his transaction utterly mundane. The teenagers had moved on. The sun was warm on my neck. It was just a market. The moment passed, the hypervigilance creeping back in, but it had been breached. A crack of normalcy had let in a sliver of light. Work became my other proving ground. The Autumn Harvest Festival was approaching, my biggest event of the year. Planning it used to be an act of pure creativity. Now, every logistic was double-checked through a security lens. Where were the choke points? How many certified security personnel did we need, not just for crowd control, but for a credible deterrent? I found myself in meetings with the local police precinct, not as a victim filing a report, but as a professional coordinating a public safety plan. Officer Daly was there. He remembered me. When the meeting broke, he pulled me aside. "Monroe," he said, his voice low. "Glad to see you're back at it." He paused, choosing his words. "You know, we never closed that file." "Not really. Things like that, they linger. We had a report a few months back, over in the industrial park west of the highway. A security guard saw a group in dark gear moving around a closed warehouse. Called it in. By the time a unit got there, they were gone. Van was seen leaving. No plates. The stone in my gut, which had shrunk to a pebble, grew heavy again. Similar gear? Description was vague. Tactical looking. Could be anything. Could be airsoft, like I said before. Could be something else. He met my eyes. "The point is, you were right to be concerned. But you're also right to live your life. Just keep those good habits." He gave me a curt nod and walked away. His words were a dark validation. The shadow was still out there, shifting, formless. But I was no longer just a target in its path, I was a professional collaborating with the forces meant to contain it. The shift in perspective was subtle but profound. The night of the Harvest Festival was clear and cold. The park was transformed, hay bales, cornstalks, strings of orange lights, the smoky scent of a bonfire. Hundreds of people milled about, laughing, their breath fogging in the air. I wore a radio on my hip, an event lanyard around my neck. From the central stage, I could see it all. My eyes still scanned, but now it was part of the job. I noticed a lone figure lingering near the tree line, and my pulse spiked. I raised my radio, about to call security, when the figure was joined by two children running up to them, holding caramel apples. A parent, waiting. I lowered the radio, a slow breath leaving my lungs. Later, as the event wound down, I was helping break down a game booth when a young volunteer, maybe 19, approached me. "Mr. Monroe?" I just wanted to say, this was really awesome. My little brother had a blast. He gestured to a boy in a Spider-Man costume, now half asleep on a bench. "Thanks for doing all this." The simple gratitude was a balm. It was a reminder of the why. This, the community, the shared joy, the creation of a safe, happy space, was the antithesis of that dark Halloween street. It was the positive construction to their negative destruction. I wasn't just building a fortress against them, I was building something they could never touch or understand. Driving home that night, tired but fulfilled, I passed through Oakwood Estates. I didn't mean to, it was just the most direct route. As I turned onto the street where it happened, a cold tension gripped my shoulders. The street was quiet, well-lit, ordinary. The house where the man had answered the door was dark. And then I was passing the spot. The street lamp still stood, casting the same cone of jaundiced light onto the sidewalk. There was nothing there. No ghost, no memory made flesh. Just cracked concrete and a fallen leaf skittering in the wind. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I drove through the memory like driving through fog, and I emerged on the other side, into my own neighborhood, toward my own home with its cameras and its reinforced door and the woman I loved waiting inside. The final piece of the integration, strangely, came from Savannah. She was a senior now, applying to colleges. She came over one evening to work on essays, her laptop glowing on my kitchen table. We got to talking, and the conversation, as it sometimes did, drifted back to that night. But her perspective had changed. "You know what I think about sometimes," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Not the woman. Not the guys in the masks. I think about the hot dog man." I was taken aback. "What?" "The old guy with the grill. Giving out hot dogs." She finally looked at me, her eyes clear and thoughtful. That whole night, he was the only real thing. Everyone else was in costume, playing a part, us, the other kids, even that creepy woman was playing a part, pretending to be a cop. But he was just, a man with a grill, doing what he thought was kind. In the middle of all that fake fear and fake monsters, he was just genuinely there. I think that's why it stood out to you, too. Her insight stunned me. In my obsession with the threat, I had compartmentalized the kindness as a separate, isolated event. But she was right. The night contained both extremes, profound, inexplicable malice, and simple, unadorned goodness. To focus only on the malice was to give it the power to color the entire world. The hot dog man was proof that the world was not monolithic. It held both. My survival depended on recognizing the former. But my humanity, my recovery, depended on remembering the latter. That conversation did more for me than months of therapy. It allowed me to reframe the entire memory not as a standalone horror, but as a complex human experience containing terror, yes, but also duty, protection, and an unexpected, paper-plated act of grace. It is now just past the 2nd anniversary. The unknown number has never texted again. The police have no new leads. The shadows in my peripheral vision remain just shadows. I have good days and bad days. On the bad days, the fear feels like a coat I can't take off. On the good days, it's a thin scarf, noticeable but not burdensome. I still carry my firearm. I always will. But it is no longer the central fact of my existence. It is a tool, like the locks on my doors or the first aid kit in my hall closet. A precaution, not an identity. The woman in the mask, and the silent figures who stood with her, took something from me that Halloween. They took my naive belief in the inherent safety of my community. But in the brutal economy of trauma, they also forced me to learn the value of what I had, a family worth protecting, a partner who chose to stand in the fortress with me, a sister with startling wisdom, and a profession that allowed me to build pockets of light in the darkness. I will never have answers. I will always have questions. But I am learning to hold them both, the mystery of the malice, and the certainty of the hot dog on a paper plate, in the same hands. And I am finally, tentatively, building a life that is not about that night, but is, inevitably and forever, informed by it. The chapter is written. The book, I am relieved to find, is still being written, one cautious, courageous, and occasionally sweet page at a time. The process of building that life, page by page, became its own kind of quiet rebellion. I began to understand that recovery wasn't a destination, but a daily practice of reclamation. It was in the small, stubborn choices. I started running again. For months after the incident, the idea of being alone on the streets at dawn, with headphones in, felt like the height of reckless vulnerability. But one crisp morning, I laced up my old shoes. I didn't go far, just a 2-mile loop I knew like the back of my hand, a route with clear sight lines and open spaces. I left the headphones at home. The sound of my own breath, the rhythm of my feet on pavement, the waking chatter of birds, became my soundtrack. It was an act of reoccupation. Every step was a declaration, this is my street. My neighborhood. My body, moving through it, unassailed, the first few runs were tense, my eyes constantly darting. But over weeks, the physical exertion began to burn away the nervous energy. The run became about endurance, not evasion. Leah and I adopted a dog. Not a guard dog, not a fierce-looking breed, but a lanky, floppy-eared rescue mutt with a perpetually worried expression we named Beans. Dr. Evans had suggested it. A creature that requires routine, that offers non-judgmental affection, and that alters your focus outward, she'd said. Beans was a security system of a different kind. His need for walks forced me out at regular intervals, integrating me back into the gentle clockwork of the neighborhood. He barked at delivery drivers and squirrels with equal fervor, a noisy, joyful alarm that shattered the tense silence I'd cultivated in my home. His warm weight curled against my legs at night did more to dispel lingering dread than any nightlight could. At work, I channeled the heightened awareness into something productive. I developed a new workshop for the center, community awareness and de-escalation. It wasn't about fear-mongering or paramilitary training. It was practical. We covered basic situational awareness, the color codes of alertness I'd been forced to live in. We discussed verbal de-escalation techniques for tense public encounters. We invited a self-defense instructor to teach nonviolent disengagement. I framed it not as preparing for the worst, but as empowering people to be more present and engaged citizens. The first class filled up immediately, mostly with women and older adults. Seeing them practice, ask questions, and leave looking more confident than afraid was deeply healing. I was transmuting my own fear into a tool for others' empowerment. The shadow was being used to cast a different kind of light. My relationship with Savannah deepened into something more adult, a shared understanding forged in fire. She got her driver's license. The night she passed her test, she came over, and I handed her a small box. Inside was a high-quality flashlight, a windowbreaker/seatbelt cutter tool, and a subscription to a roadside assistance service. Not because the world is terrible, I told her, as she turned the tools over in her hands. But because you're capable, and being capable means being prepared. For flat tires, for dead batteries, for getting lost. Not just for other things. She hugged me, a tight, fierce embrace. Thanks, Alex. For everything. She didn't have to elaborate. The unspoken understanding was that I was giving her tools for independence, not just weapons against fear. I was helping her build her own fortress, with drawbridges that could still go down. The third Halloween loomed. This year, I didn't plan to hide. Leah and I decided to host a small, low-key gathering for a few close friends. We carved pumpkins, strung orange lights on the patio, and made a big pot of chili. We would be a beacon of warmth and noise in the quiet night. As the sun set, the old familiar tension wrapped around my ribs. I checked the camera feeds a few times too many. When the doorbell rang for the first guest, I jumped. But then the house filled with laughter, with the clinking of bottles, with the comforting, chaotic sound of people I loved talking over each other. I stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter, and let the wave of normalcy wash over me. For moments at a time, I forgot to monitor the perimeter. I was just a guy at his own party. At one point, I looked out the back window at the patio, where Leah was telling an animated story, her hands carving shapes in the air, our friends laughing. The motion-activated floods were off. The only light came from the string lights and the candles flickering inside the jack-o'-lanterns. It was soft. It was inviting. It was the opposite of that cold, clinical street lamp. Later, as the party wound down, my friend Mark, who knew the broad strokes of what had happened, pulled me aside on the patio. He lit a cigarette, offering me one. I declined. "You good, man?" he asked, his voice low. I looked back at the house, at the glowing windows, at beans snuffling around someone's dropped napkin. "Yeah," I said. And for the first time on a Halloween night since it happened, I mostly meant it. "I'm good." "Still carrying?" he asked, nodding subtly toward my waist. "Always," I said. It was a simple fact, no longer a confession or a point of pride. He nodded, took a drag. "Smart." Then he clapped me on the shoulder. "Glad you're having a party. It's a good look." After everyone left, Leah and I cleaned up in comfortable silence. As we got ready for bed, she paused, looking at the security panel by the front door. "Do you want to set the alarm?" she asked. It was my ritual, my final act of control over the night. I looked at the panel, its little green light a silent sentinel. I thought of the laughter still echoing in the rooms, of the empty chili bowls in the sink, of the simple, profound safety of a shared home. "Not tonight," I said. She smiled, a small, beautiful thing, and took my hand. The following spring, I was asked to consult on the security plan for a large, citywide summer festival. Sitting in a conference room with police captains, event planners, and risk assessment consultants, I realized how far the journey had taken me. I was no longer the scared young man in the precinct waiting area. I was the one pointing at site maps, suggesting camera placements based on sightlines and crowd flow, discussing communication protocols. My expertise, born of visceral experience, had professional value. I was using the knowledge the nightmare had forced upon me to protect the joy of thousands. Driving home from that meeting, I took a different kind of detour. I went to the community center, long after hours. My keys still worked. I walked through the silent gymnasium, past the stacked chairs, and into my old office. On a shelf, behind a stack of old event posters, was a photo from the Halloween festival 2 years prior, the one that had exhausted me just before the world shifted. It was a wide shot of the kids versus parents dodgeball game, a blur of motion and gleeful shouts. I found myself in the corner of the frame, a blurry figure refilling a water cooler, my back to the camera, wholly absorbed in the simple task of supporting the fun. I took the picture down and brushed off the dust. The man in that photo had no idea what was waiting for him a few hours later. He was tired, but he was whole in a way I had spent 2 years trying to remember. I didn't envy him his innocence. He couldn't have protected what mattered. I could. I did. But holding the photo, I didn't feel the old pang of loss for that simpler self. Instead, I felt a sense of continuity. That man was me. The man who faced down the figures in the dark was me. The man who built a fortress, then slowly opened its windows, was me. The man consulting with police captains and teaching community classes was me. The trauma wasn't a bomb that shattered the vessel, it was a crucible that changed its shape, tempering it in some places, leaving scars in others, but the essential material was the same. I put the photo in my bag. I would frame it, not as a memorial to what was lost, but as a benchmark of how far I'd come. A reminder that the person who values community, who shows up for his family, who plans festivals and hands out hot dogs, that person didn't die on that street. He was tested, fundamentally, and he endured. I locked the center behind me and walked to my car. The night was clear, the stars faint pinpricks in the orange haze of the city lights. I did a casual, 360-degree scan of the parking lot, a habit as ingrained as checking my mirrors before driving. I saw nothing but empty asphalt and the dark silhouette of the playground. Getting in the car, I took a deep breath. The air inside still smelled faintly of the coffee from my morning commute. I started the engine, the headlights cutting twin paths through the darkness. As I pulled onto the main road, headed toward home, toward Leah and Beans and the life I was consciously, carefully building, I understood the final, hard-won truth. The fear might never leave completely. The questions might never be answered. The shadow of that Halloween would always stretch a certain distance behind me. But I was no longer walking backward into my future, staring at it. I was walking forward, my face to the wind, the shadow falling behind, growing longer and fainter with every step I took into the light of the life I had chosen, and fought for, and won. The night did not get to have the last word. The morning, and all the mornings after, were mine. The summer festival was a roaring success. Tens of thousands of people flowed through the downtown streets, a river of music, food, and laughter. From my post at the Central Command tent, monitoring camera feeds and radio chatter, I saw only joyful chaos, not a single threatening ripple. It was the final, powerful proof of concept. I could hold the knowledge of darkness without letting it eclipse the light. I could be the shepherd at the gate, vigilant but not terrified, ensuring the safety of the flock so they could play without a care. In the quiet aftermath, a new kind of fatigue set in, not the jagged exhaustion of adrenaline, but the deep, satisfied weariness of a job well done. It was during this calm that Leah found the box. We were finally tackling the storage closet, a graveyard of old textbooks, mismatched holiday decorations, and the ghost of my former, less guarded life. "What's this?" she asked, her voice muffled by the closet's depth. She emerged holding a simple cardboard box, its lid sealed with brittle yellow tape. I didn't recognize it. I cut the tape. Inside, carefully packed in bubble wrap, was my old Raven costume from a college Halloween party, a stack of mix CDs labeled in a friend's long-forgotten handwriting, and a small, cloth-bound journal. The journal stopped me cold. I hadn't written in it since before that night. The last entry was dated October 28th, 2 days before the world changed. Leah watched silently as I sat on the floor and opened it. The handwriting was younger, looser. I wrote about the upcoming community festival, my hopes for a big turnout, a funny story about Savannah trying to learn to drive my old stick shift. The final line of the last entry read, Halloween on Saturday. Taking Savannah and Jackson out in Oakwood. Should be a good, simple night. Maybe I'll even wear a costume next year. I stared at those words. The naivete was so profound it was physically painful. A good, simple night. The man who wrote that was gone. But as I read his hopeful, mundane plans, I didn't feel anger or grief. I felt a strange, protective tenderness for him. He was so light, so unburdened. He had no idea of the weight he would soon have to learn to carry. Are you okay? Leah whispered, sitting beside me. I nodded, tracing the faded ink with my finger. It's like a message from a ghost. A friendly ghost. What are you going to do with it? I closed the journal. I didn't want to burn it. That felt too much like an exorcism, a denial of who I had been. But I couldn't put it back in the closet, a relic to be forgotten again. I'm going to keep it, I said. But not in here. I placed it on the bookshelf in our living room, between a book on urban gardening and a photo album. It would sit among the artifacts of my present life, a quiet testament to the journey. Not hidden, not enshrined, just integrated. This act of integration became the new theme. I began to notice its echoes everywhere. I was no longer Alex, the guy who had that thing happen. To new friends, to Leah's family, to co-workers who joined after the incident, I was just Alex. My vigilance had softened into a general, unobtrusive competence. I was the one who always knew where the exits were, who had a first aid kit in his car, who could calm a tense situation with a few steady words. These traits were now just parts of my character, not scars of a trauma. One evening, Savannah came over for dinner. Jackson, now a teenager, was with her, all long limbs and cracked voice. He was deep into video games and skateboarding, his childhood fear of closets a distant memory he probably didn't even recall. Over pizza, the conversation turned, as it sometimes did with Savannah, to the future. I've been thinking about my major, she said. I'm leaning toward social work. Or maybe criminal psychology. I nearly choked on my drink. Really? She shrugged, but her eyes were sharp. Yeah. I mean, I've seen how the system works. And how it doesn't. I've seen what fear does to people. I want to understand it. Maybe help fix some of the broken parts. Jackson looked up from his phone. You'd be good at that, Save. You're, like, weirdly good at knowing when people are full of it. We all laughed, but her statement settled deep within me. She wasn't running from our shared experience, she was using it as a compass, letting it point her toward a purpose. The event was not a story she told, but a foundational stone in the person she was becoming. I felt a surge of pride so fierce it threatened to undo me. Later, as I walked them to Savannah's car, Jackson hung back. Hey, Uncle Alex? Yeah, bud. He scuffed his shoe on the pavement, suddenly looking like the kid he still was. Savannah told me more about that Halloween a while back. The real story. My breath caught. I'd never discussed the details with him, wanting to protect him. I looked at Savannah. She met my gaze, unapologetic. He asked. He's not a little kid anymore. I turned back to Jackson. Okay. I just wanted to say, thanks. He said it quickly, as if getting rid of a burden. For, being ready. It's kinda cool. There it was. Not fear, not trauma, but a seedling of respect. He saw the preparedness not as a symptom of paranoia, but as a strength. It was a perspective I was only just beginning to allow myself. That night, as I lay in bed, the pieces finally clicked into a coherent whole. The journal on the shelf. Savannah's chosen career path. Jackson's gratitude. Leah's steady presence beside me. The successful festival. My own hard-won equilibrium. It was an ecosystem, a balanced world that had grown around the scarred land of that night. The trauma was not the center of the map anymore. It was a landmark, a dark valley I had passed through. The map itself was vast, and it was filled with cities of love, forests of growth, and rivers of quiet purpose. The final surrender of the old fear happened in the most mundane way possible. It was a Tuesday. I was late for work. I rushed out the door, my mind already on the day's meetings. I was halfway to the community center when I realized, with a jolt, that I had forgotten my gun. For a split second, pure, unadulterated panic seized me. I was exposed. Vulnerable. The old script screamed in my head. I almost turned the car around. But then I kept driving. I took inventory. I had my phone. I was taking a familiar route in broad daylight to a place filled with people who knew me. The world outside my windshield was just the world. People commuting, kids waiting for buses, an old man walking a tiny, prancing dog. It was not a hostile landscape. It was just life. I didn't turn around. My heart hammered for a few minutes, then gradually settled. The sky didn't fall. By the time I parked at the center, the panic had been replaced by a profound, almost giddy sense of freedom. It was a small thing, forgetting an object. But it was a monumental victory. For the first time in years, my safety did not feel contingent on that specific tool. It felt contingent on me, on my awareness, my judgment, my place in a community. The weapon was a choice, not a crutch. I never made a habit of leaving it behind. But knowing I could, that I had walked through the world without it and been perfectly okay, changed the equation forever. The power was back where it belonged, inside me. Years have now passed. The memory of the woman's smile, the silent figures, the photo in the night, they have lost their sharp, visceral edge. They are facts of my history, like a broken bone from childhood that aches when it rains. The rain comes less often now. I still work at the community center. I still teach the awareness class every quarter. I begin each one the same way. This isn't about being afraid. It's about being present. The greatest tool for your safety is your own attention. Leah and I got married in a small ceremony in a sun-dappled grove. No security detail, just friends and family. Savannah was the maid of honor. Jackson, now taller than me, awkwardly handsome in a suit, was an usher. As I stood at the front, waiting for Leah to walk down the aisle, I did my habitual scan of the gathered faces. I saw love, anticipation, joy. I saw no masks. I saw no shadows that didn't belong. In that moment, the last of the internal fortress walls, the ones made of memory and not steel, simply dissolved. I was not in a defended space. I was in a sacred one. Sometimes, on a dark night, if I'm walking beans and the wind rustles the trees just so, my hand might still drift toward the small of my back. Old pathways in the brain are the last to fade. But now, the gesture is followed not by a flood of fear, but by a quiet acknowledgement. A nod to the ghost of who I was, and what he survived. The answer to, why us, never came. And I've made peace with its absence. Some mysteries are not riddles to be solved, but storms to be weathered. We weathered ours. We repaired the damage. We rebuilt stronger, with wider foundations and windows that let in more light. The story, as I tell it now, ends not on that dark street, but here, in the quiet contentment of an ordinary evening. The smell of dinner cooking. The sound of Leah humming in the other room. Beans snoring on his bed. The soft glow of the security panel's green light by the door, a light I now often forget to arm. On the shelf, between the gardening book and the photo album, sits a cloth-bound journal, its pages a testament to a simpler time, a voice from a shore I left long ago. I am no longer that carefree young man. But I am, finally, at home in the man I became. The vigil is over. The watch continues, but it is a gentle one, a part of the loving stewardship of a life that is, against all odds, and because of a few crucial seconds of courage, still beautifully, wonderfully, simply good.